Some silences outlast the people who keep them. Some loves are never said out loud. They end up locked in boxes that no one ever opens again. I'm going to tell you the story of Miriam Harper and Sonia Caldwell, an archivist who believed that documents never lie, and a paper conservator whose hands trembled every time she touched that letter, as if she already knew what it said. When Miriam inherited her great-aunt Catherine's house in Savannah's Historic District, she found a room that had been padlocked for over 40 years. Inside, a metal box sealed with rusted wire. And inside that box, a letter with the ink nearly gone, 2 black and white photographs, and a handkerchief folded with the tenderness of someone holding on to the only thing they have left. To save those words, Miriam found her way to Sonia's studio. But from the moment Sonia opened that box, something shifted behind her eyes. As though she wasn't discovering this story, but coming back to it. Because that letter held something that wasn't just going to change what Miriam knew about her great-aunt. It was going to change what she knew about herself. And the woman standing in front of her was the key to everything. This is not just a story about a buried love. It's a story of silences that destroy, of truths that wait decades to surface, and of 2 women who will have to decide whether to repeat the past or break it. Stay with me until the end to hear this story. See you soon. The paper said, "If anyone ever reads this, I want them to know that what I felt was real, and that I never forgave myself for staying silent." Miriam Harper read those 2 lines on her knees, on the cracked tile floor of a room that had been locked for over 40 years. Her great-aunt Catherine's house smelled of stale air, rotting wood, and a loneliness so old it had seeped into the walls like a second coat of paint. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold. Outside, Savannah was sweltering under a pale March sun, but from something she couldn't name, something that lodged itself in her chest, as though those words had been written for her too. And the worst part wasn't what they said. The worst part was that the handwriting looked too much like her great-aunt's. Subscribe now. YouTube prioritizes subscribers, and those who aren't subscribed miss out on future stories like this one. That morning, a few hours before she knelt in front of a ghost made of paper, Miriam had buried Catherine Harper at Bonaventure Cemetery, under a sky that didn't have the decency to rain. It would have been fairer, she thought, if the sky had cracked open the way she couldn't. But no. The sun held firm, yellow and cruel, as if the death of a 75-year-old woman who had lived alone her entire life didn't deserve a single drop of water. 6 people came to the funeral. 6, counting the minister. Miriam watched the scene from the back, standing beside a live oak draped in Spanish moss that hung like mourning veils over the freshly turned earth. She didn't cry. Not because she didn't want to, but because funerals, when they happen too many times, stop hurting. They become transactions, routines of cold handshakes and hollow embraces from people who don't know what to say, and who, if she was honest with herself, didn't particularly care. Her mother didn't come. She hadn't spoken about Catherine in years. She was an odd woman, she would say in that clipped voice she used to shut down topics she didn't want to open. She lived alone because she chose to. Nobody forced her. Miriam had always felt that something was missing from that sentence, like a drawer slammed shut too quickly so you wouldn't see what was inside. After the burial, Mr. Whitfield, a short man with a gray mustache and a suit that hung loose on his narrow shoulders, handed her a manila envelope with a key inside. "Miss Catherine left the house to you," he said, without emotion, the way someone reads a weather report. "No other heirs. The attorney has everything in order. You just need to sign." Miriam looked at the key. It weighed more than a piece of metal should. "To me?" she asked, not fully understanding. Explicitly. There's a letter she left with the will. It says, "For Miriam, she'll know what to do." Nothing else. Miriam slipped the key into the pocket of her black coat and stood in front of Catherine's still fresh grave, while the few attendees scattered like dry leaves pushed by a wind with no direction. She didn't know what to think. She hadn't been close to her great aunt. She'd visited maybe 10 times in her whole life, always tagging along with her grandmother Louise as a child. She remembered little. A house with a courtyard full of ferns and creeping jasmine, a smell of old paper, a woman who spoke little but watched everything, as though she were weighing each word before releasing it. And now that woman had left her a house. Her, not her mother, not anyone else. She'll know what to do. What was that supposed to mean? Catherine's house sat on a cobblestone lane in Savannah's Historic District, a few blocks from Forsyth Park, hidden behind a tall brick wall that time had darkened with moss and age until it looked almost black. The wrought iron gate groaned when Miriam pushed it open with her shoulder. The sound echoed off the interior walls like something that didn't want to be woken. She stepped inside slowly. The courtyard was exactly as she remembered it from childhood, only sadder. The clay pots were still lined up against the wall, but most were dry. The soil cracked like tiny forgotten deserts. Only a wisteria vine in the corner had refused to die, spilling its purple blossoms over the stone pavers with a stubbornness that struck Miriam as painful. She walked through the house the way someone walks through a museum nobody visits. The living room, with its green velvet armchair sunken under the weight of decades. A table set with a single plate, a single glass, a single fork. Miriam stopped in front of that. A single fork. An entire life fits in that detail. A whole lifetime of eating alone, of having no one to pass the salt to, of hearing only the sound of your own footsteps against cold tile. Her throat tightened. She looked away. The kitchen smelled of dead spices, thyme, cinnamon, a distant trace of bay leaf, and gas that no one had fully turned off. Miriam twisted the stove knob carefully. Then she continued down the hallway toward the bedrooms. Catherine's bedroom was clean, the bed made with a quilt stitched with red magnolias that must have been beautiful once. On the nightstand sat a book lying face down. Miriam stepped closer. A worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, and a pair of reading glasses with a bent frame. But it was the other room, the one at the end of the hall, that stopped her. The door was shut, not with a key, but with something more absolute. An old, rusted padlock with a chain wrapped around the handle like a sick embrace. Miriam pulled the chain. It gave way with a dry crack. The padlock fell to the floor and split in two. She pushed the door open. The air that escaped was thick, stagnant, as if it had been holding its breath for decades. The room was small. A dark wood desk against the wall. A chair. A window sealed with yellowed newspaper clippings that blocked the light. And in the corner, a wardrobe. Miriam approached the wardrobe. She opened it. Inside there were no clothes, just dust, cobwebs, and in the deepest corner, a metal box the size of a shoebox, sealed with rusted wire. It was light, but something shifted inside when she lifted it. She sat on the floor with the box in her lap. It took several minutes to untangle the wire. She cut her finger. A drop of blood fell on the metal and slid down like a red tear. She opened the box. Inside was a piece of paper folded 3 times, yellowed, the ink nearly devoured by time. 2 black and white photographs. A dried flower. A jasmine blossom, maybe, though it no longer had a scent. Pressed between the pages of a small leather journal. An old movie ticket stub. And a white handkerchief, folded with a tenderness that contrasted with everything else, as if it had been the last thing placed inside. Miriam took the paper first. She unfolded it with the care of an archivist, with that patience they had taught her in college, and that she had perfected over years of working at the Georgia Historical Society, handling documents that crumbled at the touch of air. The ink had migrated, spreading into blurred stains that made most of the lines illegible. But at the top, where the ink was denser, she could read, "If anyone ever reads this, I want them to know that what I felt was real, and that I never forgave myself for staying silent." And below, separated by a space, "Catherine, I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that every night since I left, I look south and think of you." The rest was lost in stains, in ghosts of words that time had decided to swallow. She could only make out scattered fragments. The garden. Afraid. Your name. I never told anyone. And at the very end, nearly invisible, a signature that started with R. Miriam sat motionless. She read the visible lines once, twice, 5 times. The words didn't change, but each time she read them, they weighed a little more. Someone had written to her great aunt, someone who left, someone who looked south every night and thought of her. She picked up the photographs. The first showed 2 young women standing in what looked like a park square. The image had been cropped unevenly, as though someone had deliberately cut away whatever lay beyond the frame. The 2 women stood close together, with a nearness that could be friendship or could be something more. One of them, tall, dark hair pinned up, had to be a young Catherine. The other was shorter, with a round face and eyes that seemed to be laughing at something the camera didn't capture. On the back of the photo, in the same handwriting as the paper, Forsyth Park, 1974. The second photograph was different. The same 2 women, but closer, sitting on a bench, the shorter one leaning against Catherine's shoulder. They weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at some point beyond the frame, as if the real world existed somewhere else. On the back, "The day we promised." R. Miriam felt the air in the room grow heavier. The day we promised. Promised what? To whom? And why had that promise ended up locked in a box with wire in the darkest room of a house where a woman had lived and died alone? She took everything back to her apartment downtown, a few blocks from River Street. A small, tidy space organized with an archivist's precision, books sorted by subject, documents in labeled folders, a single plant, a pothos that survived with the stubbornness of something that doesn't need anyone to keep growing. Miriam thought of Catherine's wisteria, and the thought stung. She didn't eat dinner. She sat at her desk with the open box in front of her, and a desk lamp aimed directly at the paper. She spent hours trying to decipher the blurred words, using a magnifying glass, changing the angle of the light, noting every fragment she could make out in a new notebook. That night in the garden when... couldn't say it. Not in those times. Not in this town that would have... We promised that if someday... Your name is the last thing I say before... The leather journal had most of its pages torn out. The few that survived held brief entries, dated between 1973 and 1976, written in Catherine's hand. R came today, brought Jasmine. Today R looked at me that way again, and I didn't know what to do with my hands. I told R we couldn't go on like this. She left without a word. I regretted it before she closed the gate. Miriam closed the journal. She stared at the wall. Outside, Savannah hummed the way it always hummed. The low drone of cicadas, a distant riverboat horn, the life of a city layered in centuries of secrets, oblivious to the fact that in a small apartment downtown, a woman had just discovered that her great-aunt had loved someone in secret for her entire life, and that the love had ended up locked in a metal box like something dangerous. like something that could explode if anyone opened it. R. Who was R? The next morning, Miriam did what she did best: research. At the Georgia Historical Society, between shifts of cataloging, she searched civil records from Savannah in the 70s, census rolls, property deeds, old phone directories, anything that might connect an initial to a name, to a person, to a story. But R was only a letter, and stories like Catherine's, if it was what Miriam was beginning to suspect, didn't leave official records. There were no documents certifying love between two women in 1974 Savannah. No papers that validated a promise whispered in a garden on some ordinary night half a century ago. What there was a dying piece of paper that needed to be saved before the ink vanished entirely. "I need someone who can restore a badly damaged document," Miriam told her colleague Diane during lunch in the break room that smelled of weak coffee and plastic. "Iron gall ink on cotton rag paper, probably from the 70s. It's nearly illegible." Diane, a woman in her mid-50s who had been at the Historical Society longer than most of the furniture, looked at her over her bifocals. "There's a woman over in the Historic District. Works alone in a little studio behind the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. Restores antique paper, manuscripts, that sort of thing. She's good. Odd, but good." "Odd how?" "Odd like you." Diane laughed with that laugh of hers that sounded like a cough. "Serious, quiet. The kind who talks more to documents than to people. Her name's Sonia. Sonia Caldwell." Miriam wrote the name on a napkin. Sonia Caldwell. She didn't know then that the name was going to split her life into two halves, before knowing her, and after. That night, back in her apartment, Miriam pulled out the photographs again. She looked at the woman who wasn't Catherine, the one with the round face, the laughing eyes, and wondered if anyone had ever searched for her, if anyone had ever asked what became of her, if in some other house in some other city, there was another box sealed with wire holding the same words from the other side of the silence. And she wondered, with a chill she didn't want to examine too closely, why those questions hurt as if they were her own. 3 days later, Miriam was walking through the cobblestone streets of Savannah's Historic District with the metal box under her arm and an address written on a crumpled napkin. She had slept badly the 3 previous nights. Confused, fragmented dreams in which she walked through a house she didn't recognize, searching for something she couldn't name. She'd wake with her jaw clenched and the metallic taste of having ground her teeth for hours. March in Savannah had that particular light that exists only in the low country, a high clean sun falling on antebellum facades painted in cream, in dusty rose, in pale blue, making every wall look like a painting. The live oaks were in their full canopy, draping Spanish moss over the sidewalks like gray curtains that swayed in the breeze with a slow, ghostly elegance. The air smelled of damp earth from the garden beds that the ladies watered from their porches, of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner, and beneath everything, that indefinable scent of Savannah that is a mix of history, salt marsh, and millions of layered lives. Miriam passed Chippewa Square without stopping. The street artists were already setting up their easels. A group of children chased pigeons around the fountain, while a grandmother called out names that got lost in the wind. A pair of tourists posed for photos in front of the cathedral with the clumsy joy of people who don't know a place and can therefore see it without the weight of its secrets. Miriam envied them briefly. She turned down a narrow lane, then another narrower still, and reached a nameless alley behind the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. The walls were old brick, covered in creeping fig that seemed determined to swallow the buildings whole. At the end of the alley, a wooden door with a small, almost invisible sign that read, "Paper Conservation and Restoration, S. Caldwell." Miriam knocked twice. No answer. She knocked a third time, harder, and heard slow footsteps on the other side. The door opened just a few inches. "Yes?" The voice was low, with a tone that wasn't exactly hostile but didn't invite you in either. "I'm looking for Sonia Caldwell. Your work was recommended to me for restoring a document." A silence. Then the door swung open. The woman standing before Miriam had dark hair pulled up in a messy bun from which loose strands escaped. She wore a work apron smudged with what looked like wheat paste and thin cotton gloves that gave her the appearance of a surgeon or an art thief. She was about 33, maybe 34, not conventionally pretty, but there was something in her face, the intensity of her brown eyes, the firm line of her jaw, the way she raised one eyebrow slightly as if evaluating everything she saw, that made it hard to look away. "Who recommended me?" Sonia asked, not moving from the doorway. "Diane Fletcher. We work together at the Georgia Historical Society." Sonia measured her with a look that lasted 1 second longer than comfortable. "Come in." The studio was a rectangular space, deeper than it appeared from outside. Light entered through a skylight in the ceiling, falling in a precise rectangle over a long work table where instruments Miriam recognized immediately rested. Bone folders, fine brushes, wooden presses, glass jars filled with liquids of different colors. On the walls, shelves held rolls of Japanese tissue paper, linen cloth, silk thread. It smelled of starch paste, of old paper, that sweet, earthy aroma of decomposing cellulose, and of something else, something herbal, perhaps the green tea steaming in a cup on a corner of the desk. Documents in various stages of restoration hung from clips on lines like laundry drying. Miriam spotted an antique map, a couple of pages that looked like they came from an 18th century book, and what might be a notarial deed with a red wax seal. "What type of document?" Sonia asked, removing her gloves with precise movements as she approached the main table. "A letter," Miriam answered, placing the metal box on the table. "Probably from the 70s. Iron gall ink on cotton rag paper. The ink has migrated and most of the text is illegible." Sonia opened the box. Her hands paused for an instant, barely perceptible, when she saw the contents. Miriam noticed but said nothing. "May I?" Sonia gestured toward the folded paper. "Go ahead." Sonia put on a fresh pair of gloves and lifted the paper with a gentleness that struck Miriam as almost reverent. She unfolded it on the table beneath the direct light from the skylight and leaned over it with a magnifying glass. The silence that followed was long. Miriam watched Sonia examine the document. The way she moved the magnifying glass with millimetric precision, the absolute concentration on her face, the small movements of her lips as if she were reading the still visible words to herself. At one point, Sonia's gloved finger stopped over a section of the paper. Her breathing changed, slowed, like someone trying to control themselves. It lasted a second. Then she continued. "The iron gall ink oxidized the paper fibers," she said finally, straightening up. "Typical damage in documents from that era. The good news is, the ink didn't disappear entirely. It migrated into the paper's inner layers. I can try to recover portions of the text using chemical reagents and ultraviolet light, but it's a slow process. Delicate." "How long?" "Depends on the condition of each section. A few weeks, maybe a month. I'd need to work zone by zone, one at a time, and let each dry between sessions." "And the cost?" Sonia looked at her with something that wasn't quite annoyance, but resembled it. "What does the letter say?" The question caught Miriam off guard. "I don't know. That's why I need it restored. I mean what you can read, the first lines." Miriam hesitated. There was something uncomfortable about saying it out loud, as though the words were made of glass and might shatter if spoken in front of a stranger. "It says that what she felt was real, and that she never forgave herself for staying silent." Sonia went still for a moment. Then she nodded slowly, as though the answer confirmed something she already knew. "I won't charge you," she said. Documents that someone tried to silence don't have a price. I only ask one thing. What's that? That you tell me the story. What you know. What you don't know. I need to understand the document's context to restore it properly. Paper speaks, but it speaks better when you know what it's trying to say. It seemed like a strange request to Miriam, but a reasonable one. They sat on 2 tall stools facing the work table, and Miriam told her the little she knew. Catherine, the house, the funeral, the box. Sonia listened without interrupting, elbows on the table, her gaze fixed on the paper laid out between them. When Miriam finished, the silence settled between them like a third person in the room. "When can we start?" Miriam asked. "Tomorrow. Come at 10. You'll want to be here when the words start to appear." Miriam came back the next day, and the day after, and the one after that. The first sessions were almost silent. Sonia worked with a concentration that excluded everything else, applying reagents with a brush finer than an eyelash, passing the ultraviolet lamp over sections of the paper with the patience of someone who knows that important things cannot be rushed. Miriam sat watching from a meter away, writing down every word that emerged from nothing, as if she were unearthing something. Little by little, the text began to appear. Loose phrases at first, like pieces of a puzzle whose full picture was still impossible to guess. That night in the garden, when the world went silent, and the only thing that existed was you. Couldn't say it, not in those times, not in this town that would have destroyed us if it knew. We promised that if someday the fear left us, we'd find each other. Miriam read each fragment and felt the air in the studio thicken, as if the words, becoming visible, released a weight the paper had been carrying for half a century. She didn't speak while Sonia worked. It was an unspoken rule they both respected. The silence of the studio was sacred, like the silence of a church or an operating room. But afterward, when Sonia finished a session and cleaned her instruments with that ritual meticulousness that was beginning to fascinate Miriam, they talked. At first only about the document, what a particular fragment meant, what era it might have been written in, what kind of ink was used in 70s Georgia. Then, gradually, they spoke of other things. "Why paper conservation?" Miriam asked during the 4th session, while Sonia prepared a calcium hydroxide solution. Sonia didn't answer right away. She measured the reagent with a pipette, dropped 3 careful drops into a glass dish, and only then spoke. Because every document someone tried to destroy is a voice someone tried to silence, and it seems unfair to me that time should have the last word. Miriam watched her. Sonia had her eyes on the dish, but her voice had changed, had grown quieter, more personal, as if the answer came from a place she didn't usually show. "And you?" Sonia asked. "Why an archivist?" "Because archives don't lie. People lie. Memories lie. But a document, a piece of paper with a date and a signature, says exactly what it says. No more, no less." Sonia looked up. Sometimes what it doesn't say matters more than what it does. Neither of them knew how long they held each other's gaze. Probably only a few seconds, but to Miriam, it felt as though something moved between them, something silent and dangerous, like an underground current that pulls you without your noticing. It was Miriam who looked away first. By the 2nd week, the text had revealed enough to confirm what Miriam already suspected. The letter was addressed to Catherine. It had been written by a woman named Ruth. And what it described was not a friendship. It was a love, fierce, painful, hidden, that had existed in 1970s Savannah, in an era when something like that could destroy your life. Ruth wrote with an honesty that hurt to read. "I loved you the only way I knew how, which was in secret, and I hated myself for not knowing any other way. My mother found your handkerchief in my purse and asked whose it was. I told her nobody's. You were my nobody who mattered more than everyone. Sonia read each fragment she restored before showing it to Miriam. Or at least that's what it seemed like. Miriam began to notice, with that archivist's eye that detects alterations in documents, inconsistencies in dates, marks that don't match, that Sonia sometimes lingered longer than necessary over a section, as if she were reading it twice. 3 times. She said nothing, but her eyes, when she looked up after those pauses, held something different. A brightness that could have been professional emotion, or could have been something else entirely. If this doesn't deserve a like, I don't know what does. In the 3rd week, Miriam brought the photographs. She set them on the table beside the paper Sonia was restoring and pointed to the woman who wasn't Catherine. I think this is Ruth, the one who wrote the letter. Sonia picked up the photographs. She studied them for a long while. Her face didn't change. She held that neutral, professional expression Miriam was beginning to recognize as a mask. But her hands did. They gripped the photos too tightly. Her knuckles, beneath the cotton gloves, rose like small white hills. They look young, Sonia said, and her voice sounded carefully flat, like the surface of a lake hiding something beneath. 1974, says on the back. Do you know anything else about Ruth? Last name, address, anything? Only the initial R on the letter and the full first name that appeared in a fragment you restored last week. Ruth. Nothing else. My great-aunt lived alone her whole life. My family never mentioned anyone by that name. Sometimes families choose not to mention certain things. I know. Another silence. This one longer, denser. Miriam had the sensation of standing at the edge of something without knowing which side to fall. Sonia. Yes? Why did you agree to do this for free? Sonia returned the photographs to the table. She removed one glove, then the other, with slow movements. She ran a hand through her hair, freeing a strand that fell across her forehead. I already told you, silence documents don't have a price. That's a good line, but it's not an answer. Sonia looked at her directly. For the first time, Miriam saw something behind the professional mask, a small crack, almost invisible, through which peered something that looked like fear. It is an answer, just not the whole answer. Miriam wanted to press further, but something in the way Sonia held her gaze, steady and vulnerable at the same time, as if to say, "Don't ask me yet," stopped her. She nodded, said nothing more. That night in her downtown apartment, Miriam couldn't sleep. She sat on the floor of her living room with Catherine's leather journal open before her and reread the surviving entries one more time. The Jasmine visits. The glances that left Catherine unable to use her own hands. The ultimatum that ended in regret before the gate even closed. Each line hit harder the second time, as if the words had been soaking in her all day and were now heavier with meaning. And then the final entry, dated June 17th, 1976. R is gone. Her family sent her to Nashville. I couldn't say goodbye. I kept her handkerchief. It's the only thing I have left. I'm going to put everything in the box and I'm going to lock the room. I don't want to open it again. If I open it, I'll go looking for her. And if I go looking, they'll destroy us both. Miriam closed the journal. She stared at the wall for a stretch of time she didn't measure. She thought about Catherine, a woman in her mid-20s locking the love of her life in a box and chaining the door shut so she wouldn't go searching for it. She thought about how many nights Catherine lay awake staring at that locked door, knowing that on the other side was everything she wanted and everything she couldn't have. And she thought about Sonia, about her hands on the photographs, about her white knuckles beneath the gloves, about that crack in her gaze that looked too much like someone who isn't discovering a story, but recognizing one. Miriam opened her laptop, She typed into the search bar, Sonia Caldwell, paper conservator, Savannah. She found little: a mention in an article on document conservation, a review in a historian's forum. Nothing personal, no photo. Then, on an impulse she couldn't explain, she typed something else. Ruth Savannah, 1970s. Nothing useful. She closed the laptop. She lay on her bed, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling until sleep overtook her. Sometime before dawn, she dreamed she was walking through a garden she didn't recognize, and someone whispered a word in her ear that she couldn't remember upon waking. The only thing she remembered was the voice, and that it sounded like Sonia's. The next morning, when she arrived at the studio at 10 o'clock, Sonia was already working on a new section of the letter. The ultraviolet lamp cast a bluish glow over the paper, and beneath that ghostly light, letters were beginning to appear as if someone were writing them in real time from the other side of the years. Sonia didn't look up when Miriam came in. That wasn't unusual. But when she spoke, her voice held a tremor Miriam hadn't heard before. Miriam. Yes? Come look at this. Miriam approached the table. She leaned over the paper next to Sonia, close enough to smell the scent of her shampoo. Something herbal, maybe rosemary, mixed with the chemical smell of the reagents. Under the ultraviolet light, a new paragraph was becoming visible, letter by letter, like a secret that time no longer had the strength to keep. It read, "If anyone in your family ever finds this, I want them to know who I was. My name is Ruth Langston. I was born in this city, grew up 3 streets from your house, and I loved you from the time I was 17 until the day I'm writing this. And I've long lost count of how many years that is. I had to leave. They married me to a good man I never loved. I had a daughter. I gave her a name that starts with the same letter as yours, so I could say your name without anyone knowing. But I never stopped looking for you in every street, every garden, every jasmine that bloomed in spring." Miriam's breath caught. Not because of the name, Ruth Langston, now she had a full name, but because of what came next. In the lines, the ultraviolet light kept revealing with the slow cruelty of someone peeling a bandage from an old wound. "And I asked my granddaughter to learn how to care for the written word, because the written word is the only proof that what we felt ever existed. If she ever finds this paper, she'll know what to do." Miriam read that line twice, 3 times. Then she slowly turned her head toward Sonia. Sonia was motionless. She wasn't looking at her. Her eyes were fixed on the paper, her jaw tight, her hands pressed flat against the table. A single tear slid down her left cheek, tracing the line of her jaw before disappearing. "Sonia," Miriam said, her voice coming out hoarse, as if the words had to push through something solid. "Ruth Langston." Sonia didn't move. "Your last name is Caldwell, but Langston. Ruth Langston." Miriam felt the pieces falling one by one, like dominoes someone had pushed 50 years ago that were only now reaching the end of the line. "She's your grandmother?" The silence that followed was the longest and heaviest Miriam had ever experienced. Longer than the silence of Catherine's funeral. Heavier than the silence of all the nights she'd spent alone in her apartment, wondering if the emptiness she felt had a name. Sonia closed her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Ruth Langston was my grandmother." And in that moment, everything Miriam thought she understood about the box, about the letter, about Sonia, about herself, shattered like glass struck by a stone, and the pieces fell to the studio floor without either of them knowing how to pick them up. Miriam stepped back from the table as if the paper burned. "You knew," she said, and it wasn't a question. "From the first day. From the moment I opened that box in front of you. You knew." Sonia still hadn't moved. The tear had dried on her cheek, leaving a shining trail under the ultraviolet light that still bathed the paper in a bluish glow that now looked like the color of a lie. Miriam, is that why you didn't charge me? Is that why you wanted the story? Miriam's voice rose, not in volume, but in intensity, like a string someone was tightening with surgical precision. You weren't restoring a document. You were looking for something. What? What were you looking for? Sonia opened her eyes. They were red but dry. She removed her gloves slowly, set them on the table with a delicacy that in that moment struck Miriam as insulting, and swiveled on her stool until she faced her. I didn't know from the first day, Sonia answered, her voice carrying the forced calm of someone willing themselves not to fall apart. I suspected. When I saw the iron gall ink and the type of paper, when you told me it was from the 70s and from Savannah, something shifted. My grandmother Ruth talked to me many times about a letter she'd left somewhere in this city. She never told me where. She never told me who it was for. But she described the paper. She described the ink. She described the way she folded it 3 times, because 3 was the number of times she said "I love you" out loud in her entire life. Miriam felt the floor tilt beneath her. She gripped the edge of the table. And when did you stop suspecting and start knowing? When I saw the photographs. That was a week ago. Yes. We worked together an entire week, 7 days. We talked about the letter, about Catherine, about Ruth. You looked me in the eye and said nothing. I didn't know how to say it. How to say what? That your grandmother wrote that letter? That the story we're unearthing belongs to your own family? Sonia stood up. She walked to the back of the studio, where a white ceramic sink hung from the wall next to a mirror splashed with dried paste. She splashed cold water on her face. Miriam watched her from the table, arms crossed, a storm behind her eyes that wasn't going to let up easily. My grandmother died 4 years ago, Sonia said, her back to Miriam, speaking to the mirror as though it were easier to tell the truth while looking at herself. She died in Nashville, where she lived the last 50 years of her life. She married my grandfather Ernest. She had a daughter, my mother, whom she named Claire, with a C, like Catherine. Miriam closed her eyes. I gave her a name that starts with the same letter as yours, so I could say your name without anyone knowing. The line from the letter echoed in her mind like a sound that won't fade. In the last years of her life, Sonia continued, finally turning around, my grandmother started talking about things she'd never mentioned before. At first we thought it was age, confusion, maybe the beginning of something. But it wasn't confusion. It was clarity. It was as if after decades of silence, the quiet weighed more than the truth. She talked to me about Savannah, about a house with wisteria, about a woman who smelled of jasmine, about a letter she'd hidden somewhere and never knew if anyone had found. Sonia paused. She leaned against the sink with her arms crossed, a posture that mirrored Miriam's exactly from the other side of the studio. One day, 2 weeks before she died, she took my hand and said, Sonia, you have the hands that care for words. Someday you'll find mine. And when you do, I want you to return them. Take them where they belong. I didn't understand. I asked her what she was talking about. She fell asleep and never mentioned it again. The studio filled with a silence that seemed to have weight, texture, temperature. Miriam could feel it pressing against her chest, her temples, that part of her that wanted to be furious but couldn't because the story was too sad to sustain the anger. You should have told me, Miriam insisted, though her voice had already lost its edge. I know, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? Sonia looked at her with that intensity Miriam had learned to recognize over the past weeks, the gaze of someone calculating exactly how much truth they can release without breaking something beyond repair. That you'd stop coming. The sentence fell between them like a stone in a pond. The ripples spread in every direction, touching things neither of them had named. The glances that lasted a beat too long. The silences that weren't uncomfortable but full. The scent of rosemary that Miriam now associated with mornings in the studio. The way Sonia brushed her hand when passing the magnifying glass, without either of them acknowledging that the contact wasn't accidental. Miriam didn't answer. She took her bag from the stool where she'd left it, tucked her notebook inside, and walked toward the door without looking back. Hand on the latch, she stopped. "I need a few days," she said, without turning. "To think." And she stepped out into the alley in Savannah's Historic District, where the afternoon sun fell at an angle across the cobblestones, and a street vendor was selling pralines with a sing-song call that sounded like it belonged to another century. 5 days passed. 5 days during which Miriam didn't go to the studio, didn't call, didn't reply to the 2 texts Sonia sent. The first read, "I understand if you're upset. Take whatever time you need." The second, sent 3 days later. A new word appeared in the letter. "I think you'll want to see it." Miriam read both messages. She didn't respond to either. Instead, she did what she always did when reality became too complicated. She buried herself in work. She spent entire days at the Georgia Historical Society, submerged in colonial-era records and legal files, cataloging documents with a mechanical precision that allowed her not to think about Sonia, about the letter, about Sonia's hands on the letter, about Sonia's eyes when she said, "I was afraid you'd stop coming." But archives have the cruel habit of reminding you of what you're trying to forget. On Wednesday, while cataloging a file from 1953, she found a series of personal letters intercepted by police as part of an investigation into moral offenses. The letters were from one woman to another. They spoke of stolen meetings in a park, of hands brushing in the darkness of a movie theater, of the shared certainty that the world was not designed for what they felt. The last letter never reached its intended recipient. It remained trapped in a court file, between arrest records and witness statements, like a butterfly pinned under glass in a gallery nobody visits. Miriam closed the file. She sat at her desk at the Historical Society, surrounded by gray cardboard boxes containing thousands of stories no one would ever read, and for the first time in 5 days allowed the thought she'd been blocking to break through like water through a crack. Sonia hadn't lied out of malice. Sonia had lied for the same reason Ruth locked the letter in a box, for the same reason Catherine chained the room shut, out of fear. Because some truths feel too large to release, and you convince yourself that silence is safer than honesty, not realizing that silence also carries a price, and that sometimes the price is spending a lifetime alone in a Savannah house, with a single plate on the table for 50 years. That night, Miriam replied to Sonia. She wrote, "I'll be there tomorrow at 10. Nothing more." Sonia responded a minute later, "I'll be here." Miriam arrived at the studio at 10 sharp. The door was ajar. Inside, Sonia was sitting at her workbench, but she wasn't working on the letter. She was holding a large craft paper envelope that hadn't been there before. They looked at each other. Neither spoke for a stretch measured in heartbeats, not seconds. Then Sonia spoke. "Before you say anything, I need to show you something. Something I brought from Nashville when my grandmother died, and that I've never shown anyone." She opened the envelope and pulled out a notebook. It wasn't like the small brown leather journal Miriam had found in Catherine's box. This one was larger, with a dark blue hardcover, a cracked spine, and pages yellowed at the edges. On the first page, in the handwriting Miriam now recognized from the letter, Ruth Langston, Savannah, 1971, 1976. "It's my grandmother's diary," Sonia said. "The years she lived here." Miriam sat down slowly, as if a sudden movement might shatter the moment. Sonia placed the notebook on the table between them and opened it to a page marked with a faded pink ribbon. "Read this entry. May 17th, 1973. Miriam read in silence. Ruth's handwriting was small, cramped, the letters tilting to the right as if they were in a hurry to get somewhere. "Today I saw her for the first time. Or rather, today I truly saw her for the first time. I've been living 3 streets from her house for 3 years, and I never looked at her like this. She was at the farmer's market on Broughton Street buying flowers. Jasmine. Her hair was loose, and the sun was hitting her face, and I just stood there like an idiot with my bag of peaches in my hand, unable to move, unable to understand what was happening to me. She turned around and smiled at me. I didn't know what to do. I dropped the peaches. She laughed. She has the most beautiful laugh I've ever heard. Her name is Catherine. She lives in the house with the wisteria. I don't know why I'm writing this. I don't know what it means. I only know that when she left, the market turned gray." Miriam raised her eyes from the notebook. Her throat had closed. "There's more," Sonia said. 3 years of entries. Some are long, entire pages. Others are a single line. "Today Catherine touched my arm and I forgot to breathe. Catherine is sad, and I don't know how to comfort her without giving myself away. I think Catherine knows. I think she knows and she doesn't mind. Or I think she knows and feels the same. I can't be sure. If I'm wrong, I lose her." Sonia read aloud, selecting entries she seemed to know by heart, and her voice shifted with each one, growing softer, more intimate, as if reading her grandmother's words, she were also reading something of her own. "November 22nd, 1973, Sonia continued. "Today it happened. I don't know how to describe it without making it less than what it was. We were in the garden of her house under the wisteria, and she was showing me how to prune the dead branches. She cut a piece of vine with her garden shears and tucked it behind my ear. And while she was adjusting it, her hand stayed there, on my cheek, and we both went still. I don't know for how long. A minute, an hour, a lifetime. Then she said, 'Ruth, do you feel it too?' And I said yes. And she kissed me. Or I kissed her. I don't know who started it. I only know that when we pulled apart, the garden smelled different, as if every jasmine in the world had bloomed at the same time." Miriam's hands were clenched on her knees. It wasn't just the story. It was the way Sonia told it, with that blend of tenderness and grief that only someone who understands exactly what those words mean, because she's felt something similar, can carry. "Why are you showing me this now?" Miriam asked. "Because you asked for the whole truth. And the whole truth isn't only in the letter we're restoring, it's here too. They're 2 halves of the same story. The letter is what Ruth wanted to say to Catherine when she could no longer say it in person. The diary is what she said to herself when she had no one else to tell." Miriam reached out and touched the diary page. The paper was soft, worn by years, and by the fingers that had touched it before. Ruth's when she wrote it, Sonia's when she read it, and now hers, as if the 3 of them were connected by an invisible thread that ran through time. "There's something else you need to know," Sonia said, her voice regaining that tremor Miriam had learned to associate with difficult truths. "My grandmother didn't come to me by accident. In the last months of her life, when she started talking about Savannah, about Catherine, about the letter, I began to investigate. I found the address of Catherine's house in one of the diary entries. I came to Savannah. I looked for the house. It was shuttered. but it existed. I asked around the neighborhood. They told me an elderly woman lived there alone, hardly ever came out. I didn't dare knock. I thought I had no right, that it was a story that didn't belong to me. But you set up your studio here, Miriam said, suddenly understanding. 3 blocks from Catherine's house. That wasn't a coincidence. Sonia shook her head. No, it wasn't a coincidence. I came to Savannah because of my grandmother. I opened the studio here because a part of me was hoping, I don't know what I was hoping, that something would happen, that someone would open that box someday, that the letter would find its way back. And when Diane gave me your name, Diane knows me because I left my card with her a year ago. I told her that if anyone at the Historical Society ever needed to restore old personal documents from the Savannah area, to send them my way. It was a gamble, a ridiculous one, but it worked. Miriam processed that. Every piece fit with the one before, forming a picture that was simultaneously unsettling and beautiful. Sonia had been waiting for years, not for Miriam specifically, but for someone who would connect the 2 halves of a story her grandmother had left unfinished. So, Miriam said slowly, nothing that happened between us was by chance. The studio, the referral, your offer to work for free, it was all orchestrated. Not all of it, Sonia replied, and something in her voice shifted, became more fragile, more exposed. What I feel when you're here, that wasn't part of any plan. The air in the studio went still. Outside, a dog barked in the alley. A church bell rang in the distance. The world kept spinning, oblivious to what was happening within those 4 walls full of paper and silence. Miriam didn't know how to respond. Not because she felt nothing, but because what she felt was too much. Residual anger over the deception, admiration for Sonia's tenacity, tenderness for Ruth and Catherine's story, and beneath all of that, much deeper down, in a place that had been locked with its own invisible padlock for years, something that dangerously resembled what Ruth described when she wrote about Catherine. Something that had no name, or had a name that Miriam wasn't yet ready to say. Let's keep working on the letter, she said at last. There's more text to restore. Sonia looked at her a beat longer, as if she wanted to say something, then nodded. Yes, there's more. They worked the rest of the morning in silence, but it was a different silence from the weeks before. Before, the silence had been comfortable, professional, the silence of 2 people focused on a shared task. Now it was charged, electric, the silence of 2 people who know there is something between them and have chosen not to look at it directly, like someone walking beside a cliff who decides not to peer over the edge. At noon, Sonia suggested they get something to eat. They walked together to City Market, a maze of colorful stalls where the smell of shrimp and grits, fried okra, and fresh peach cobbler mixed with the voices of vendors hawking their dishes like songs. They sat on a bench in front of a sandwich stand and ate without talking much, surrounded by the bustle of the market that shielded them from the weight of their own silence. Miriam watched Sonia eat. She did it with the same concentration she brought to everything, tearing her pulled pork sandwich with her hands, blowing on the steam, chewing slowly. She had a dab of barbecue sauce at the corner of her lip. Miriam thought about telling her and didn't. Then she thought about why she didn't, and decided not to analyze that either. My grandmother was happy with my grandfather, Sonia said suddenly, as if picking up a conversation that had only existed in her head. I want you to know that. It wasn't a life of constant suffering. My grandfather Ernest was a good man, hardworking. He loved her very much. They had a quiet life in Nashville. But there was something, a sadness beneath the surface that my grandmother carried the way someone carries a stone in their pocket. She never took it out, but sometimes she'd touch it, And when she did, her eyes would cloud over and she'd go somewhere else, to a place where no one else could follow. Did your grandfather know? I don't think so. Or if he did, he chose not to. That generation handled certain things that way, by not asking, not naming, not opening doors that might reveal rooms you didn't want to see. Miriam thought of her own mother. She was an odd woman. She lived alone because she chose to. Her mother knew. Maybe not the details, but she knew. And she'd chosen the same path as Sonia's grandfather. Close your eyes and keep going. Does your mother know? Miriam asked. About your grandmother and Catherine? I told her after my grandmother died. I showed her the diary. How did she react? Sonia set down what was left of her sandwich on the paper plate. She wiped her hands with a paper napkin and looked up at the Savannah sky, which that morning had the pale blue color that the sky over the low country wears when the humidity takes a day off. She cried. A lot. Then she got angry. Then she cried again. Then she told me she'd always known something didn't fit, that her mother had moments of absence that didn't match the life she lived, as if a part of her were always somewhere else. And that now she finally understood where that somewhere else was. Savannah. Savannah. A house with wisteria. A garden full of jasmine. A woman named Catherine. They went back to the studio after lunch. That afternoon, Sonia restored 3 more sections of the letter. One of them contained a paragraph that they both read in silence, shoulder to shoulder, leaning over the table under the ultraviolet light. And sometimes I think the worst thing they did to us wasn't separating us. The worst thing was convincing us that what we felt was wrong. Because if I had believed, even for 1 second, that I had the right to love you out loud, I would have shouted your name on every street corner of Savannah until the whole world knew you were mine and I was yours. But they taught us to be afraid. And fear is stronger than love when you're young and don't know that time moves faster than you think. Miriam felt Sonia tremble beside her, a barely perceptible tremor, like a leaf touched by wind, but not moved. If any part of this story feels like your own life, the hype button makes sure it doesn't stay in silence. Are you all right? Miriam asked. Sonia didn't answer immediately. She stared at her grandmother's words as if she could see through them, across 50 years, to a young woman writing at a table with the certainty that no one else would ever read those lines. When my grandmother talked to me about Catherine, Sonia said quietly, she always said the same thing. Love that isn't spoken out loud doesn't disappear. It burrows under your skin and stays there, beating, like a second heart that nobody else can hear. Miriam turned her head. Sonia was inches away. She could see the tiny freckles on the bridge of her nose, the faint line of an old scar on her left eyebrow, the almost imperceptible tremble of her lips. She could smell the rosemary of her shampoo, and the chemical tang of the reagents, and the scent of old paper that blended with everything like a third presence. Sonia, Miriam said, and her own voice sounded far away, as if it came from another room or another time. What are we doing? I don't know, Sonia answered. But I think it's the same thing they did. Only we still have time to do it differently. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch. But something happened in that moment that was more intimate than a kiss, and more definitive than an embrace. They looked at each other without masks, without professional excuses, without the alibi of the letter or the diary or the story of Ruth and Catherine. They looked at each other as 2 women who know exactly what they feel and are deciding, together, whether to be brave or to repeat the pattern of silence that destroyed the ones who came before. It was Miriam who broke the eye contact. She leaned back on her stool, sat up straight, and took a deep breath, like someone surfacing after being underwater too long. Tomorrow, she said. We'll continue tomorrow. And she left the studio before Sonia could answer, walking fast through the cobblestone alley, past the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, crossing Chippewa Square without seeing the live oaks, or the artists, or the tourists, walking until the street air cooled her face and she could think clearly again. She didn't go to her apartment. She went to Catherine's house. She let herself in with the key she still carried in her coat pocket, as if she'd known she was going to need it. The house received her with its usual smell, stale air, old wood, accumulated solitude. But this time, Miriam didn't go to the living room or the locked room. She went to the garden. The wisteria in the corner was still spilling its purple blossoms over the stones. Miriam sat on the patio floor, her back against the wall, and looked at the garden that 50 years earlier had been the setting for a first kiss between two women who didn't have permission to love each other. She tried to imagine them. Catherine pruning branches, Ruth watching her with that mix of desire and terror she described in her diary, the moment a hand lingers on a cheek and the entire world compresses into that contact. It hurt. Not a sharp pain, but an old one. Like a wound that never fully closed because no one knew it was there. It hurt for Catherine, who lived and died alone in this house, guarding a secret that consumed her the way moisture consumes paper. It hurt for Ruth, who went to Nashville and married a good man, and had a daughter, and a granddaughter, and a full life, that nevertheless had a hole in the center shaped like a garden, and smelling of jasmine. And it hurt for herself, although she wasn't ready to admit why. Miriam was 31. She'd had 2 relationships in her life, both with men, both brief, both ended for the same reason she could never articulate. A persistent feeling of being in the wrong place, of playing a role that wasn't hers, of searching for something in every embrace that she never found. After the second relationship, she decided she simply wasn't a person built for romantic love. That her life was in the archives, in documents, in other people's stories. She closed that door with the same efficiency she used to catalog files. Archive closed, label applied, box stored on the shelf. And now a woman with a conservator's hands and eyes that read more than they revealed was shaking that shelf until the boxes started falling. She stayed in the garden until dark. Then she locked the house and walked to her downtown apartment under a Savannah sky that was beginning to fill with stars. The city lights wouldn't let you see, but that were there. Like so many things that exist, even though nobody looks at them. 2 more weeks of work at the studio passed. The dynamic between Miriam and Sonia changed after the confrontation, but not in the way anyone might have expected. They didn't pull apart. They drew closer, but with the caution of 2 people walking on glass who know that one wrong step could shatter everything. They talked more than before, but about subjects that skirted the personal without fully entering it. Sonia's childhood in Nashville, Miriam's college years, books they'd read, films that had marked them. Miriam discovered that Sonia had a dry sense of humor that appeared without warning, like a ray of sunlight between clouds, and that when she laughed, which didn't happen often, she did it with her whole body, throwing her head back and closing her eyes, and it was impossible not to want to provoke that laugh again. Sonia, for her part, discovered that Miriam, behind the facade of an orderly, precise archivist, had a sensitivity she kept under lock and key, as if showing it were a luxury she couldn't afford. When she read the restored fragments of the letter, Miriam's eyes changed. They grew moist, darkened, acquired a depth that made Sonia have to look away to keep from losing herself in them. Halfway through the 4th week, the letter's text was nearly complete. Sonia had restored more than 80%, and what had emerged was a love letter of 14 pages that Ruth had written over the course of several years, adding paragraphs at different points in her life, like a diary addressed to a single person. The earliest section was from 1976, written shortly after she was sent to Nashville. The last was from 2019, 3 years before she died, set down in a trembling but steady hand. Catherine, if this ever reaches you, I want you to know that I was happy. Not the way I should have been, not the way I would have been if I'd stayed, but I was happy. And a part of that happiness always carried your name. But it was another section, one Sonia restored on a rainy Thursday in April, that changed everything. That day, Savannah woke gray. One of those spring rains that in the low country feel different because the water hits the cobblestones and produces a sound like music, an irregular tapping that accompanies everything like background percussion. The studio was darker than usual. The light from the skylight was muted, diffuse, and Sonia had switched on an extra lamp over the work table. The air smelled of humidity, of chemical reagents, and of the chicory coffee Sonia had brewed in a ceramic mug that they shared in silence while the rain drummed on the roof. Sonia was working on the second-to-last section of the letter, a particularly damaged zone where the ink had migrated so far that the letters looked like shapeless blots. She had spent nearly 2 hours applying reagents with a fine brush, passing the ultraviolet lamp over it again and again, adjusting the angle, the intensity, the distance. Miriam watched from her stool, notebook open, but she wasn't taking notes. She was watching Sonia's hands. She had realized at some point during the past weeks that Sonia's hands were what fascinated her most. They weren't delicate hands. They were working hands, long fingers, pronounced knuckles, nails trimmed short, marked with small scars from paper cuts and reagent burns. But they moved with a grace that contradicted their roughness. Every gesture precise, measured, like the movements of a dancer who has practiced the same choreography thousands of times until it looks natural. Miriam could spend hours watching those hands work, and that terrified her. "Miriam," Sonia's voice broke the spell. "Come here." She approached. Sonia pointed to a section of the paper where, under the ultraviolet light, new letters were emerging. They read together, slowly, because the ink was faint, and some words had to be guessed. "And there's something I never told you, and now, at this age, there's no longer any point in keeping it quiet. The night before I left, when I came to say goodbye and you weren't home, I left the letter in the box we kept in the back room. But I also left something else. Under the desk, taped to the underside of the drawer, I left a photograph. Not the one of us at the park, or the one on the bench. A different one. One that Miss Pearl took without us knowing, the night of the Christmas Eve gathering in '75. In that photo, we're dancing. And it shows Catherine. It shows everything we could never say out loud. If anyone ever finds the box, tell them to look under the drawer. There lies the proof that it wasn't a dream." Miriam stopped breathing. "Did you look under the desk?" Sonia asked, turning to her with eyes alight. "No, I didn't know anything else was there." They looked at each other. The rain intensified outside, pounding the skylight. Miriam grabbed her bag. "I'm going now." "I'm coming with you," Sonia said, pulling off her gloves in one swift motion. They stepped out into the alley in the rain. Sonia didn't have an umbrella. Neither did Miriam. They ran through the cobblestone streets of Savannah with water pouring over them, splashing through puddles, passing the cathedral where the gargoyles seemed to spit torrents, turning down streets Miriam now knew by heart, and that Sonia probably knew from before, from when she first came to Savannah tracing her grandmother's footsteps. They arrived at Catherine's house drenched. Miriam opened the gate with trembling hands. From the cold, she told herself. Only the cold. And they entered the courtyard, where the wisteria received the rain with open arms, its purple blossoms gleaming under the water like freshly washed jewels. They went straight to the back room. The door was still open from the first time Miriam had forced it, weeks earlier. They stepped inside. The desk stood against the wall, where it had always been. Miriam crouched, slid underneath, and felt along the bottom of the drawer with her hands. Her fingers touched something. Old adhesive tape, dry and peeling away in strips. And beneath the tape, the smooth edge of a photograph. She peeled it off carefully. She slid out from under the desk with her heart pounding in her temples and stood facing Sonia, who waited with arms crossed, her clothes dripping water onto the tile floor. The photograph was in good condition, protected from air and humidity by its hiding place. It was a black and white photo, slightly blurred, as if the person who took it didn't have much experience with a camera, or as if they'd tried to capture a moment in motion. It showed two women dancing. Not a formal dance, but a party dance, a Christmas Eve gathering, with holiday lights visible in the background as fuzzy white dots. One of them was Catherine, her hair pinned up, wearing a dress that fell to her knees. The other was Ruth, shorter, her head slightly tilted toward Catherine's shoulder, eyes closed, a smile that wasn't for the camera but for something interior, something private, something that existed only between her and the woman who held her. And Catherine. Catherine was looking at her. Not at the camera, not at the party, not at anyone else. She was looking at Ruth with an expression that needed no words, no diaries, no letters, no iron gall ink to be understood. She was looking at her as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Sonia stepped closer. Miriam showed her the photo. Sonia took it with both hands, and this time she didn't try to hold the mask. Her face crumbled slowly, like a wall giving way brick by brick, and she began to cry. Not dramatic weeping, but a quiet, deep cry. The kind that comes from the deepest place inside a person and cannot be stopped because it isn't about just one thing, but about everything that has accumulated. Her grandmother who danced one December night and had to leave. Catherine who hid this photo under a drawer and left it there for half a century. And herself, who had spent years searching for the traces of a love that no one dared to live out loud. Miriam watched her cry and knew, with a certainty that admitted no doubt, that what she felt for this woman was not professional curiosity, not empathy, not the solidarity of two people bonded by someone else's story. It was something far greater, far more dangerous, far more beautiful. And she also knew she could do one of two things: close another box, put on another padlock, seal another room, and spend the rest of her life wondering what would have happened if she'd been brave. Or she could do what Catherine and Ruth couldn't. She moved toward Sonia. She gently took the photograph from her hands and set it on the desk. Then she cupped Sonia's face in both hands, wiping her tears away with her thumbs, and looked into her eyes from so close she could see the golden flecks within the dark brown of her irises. "I'm not putting this in a box," Miriam whispered. "I'm not locking any room." Sonia looked at her with red, glistening eyes, full of a hope that resembled fear but was gaining ground, like light beginning to filter through a window someone forgot to seal. "Are you sure?" Sonia asked, her voice broken. "I'm terrified." "But yes, I'm sure." And in an old house in Savannah, under an April rain that washed the cobblestone streets and made the antebellum facades gleam, in the same room where 50 years earlier, a woman had locked the love of her life in a metal box, Miriam kissed Sonia. It was a slow, careful kiss, like the first brushstroke on a paper that might tear if pressed too hard. Sonia's lips were cold from the rain and salty from tears, and they trembled, and Miriam felt them open slowly, like a flower deciding to trust that the sun would stay. The world shrank to that. Two mouths meeting after what felt like a lifetime of waiting. The sound of rain on the roof became a curtain that separated them from everything else. And for a moment, Miriam understood exactly what Ruth meant when she wrote that every jasmine in the world had bloomed at the same time. They pulled apart. They looked at each other. Sonia let out a small, trembling laugh that merged with a sob. "My grandmother was right," she said. "About what?" "That someday the letter would find its way back. The rain didn't stop all afternoon. They stayed in Catherine's house, sitting on the floor of the back room with their backs against the wall, in wet clothes, the photograph between them. Sonia told Miriam things she hadn't told anyone, that she herself had taken years to accept who she was, that she'd grown up in Nashville feeling that something about her didn't fit what the world expected, that her grandmother was the first person she ever told, one Sunday afternoon in the kitchen while they made biscuits for Christmas. "Grandma, I think I have feelings for women." And Ruth went still for a moment, her hands covered in flour, and then looked at her with eyes that shone in a way Sonia had never seen before and said, "Then promise me one thing. Promise me you won't be afraid. Not like I was." And I promised her, Sonia said, looking at the photograph of two women dancing at a Christmas Eve gathering in 1975. I promised her I wouldn't be afraid. "And did you keep it?" Sonia looked at her. "I'm here, aren't I? A listener's comment can change everything. Yours can too." Miriam smiled. It was a small smile, still fragile, like the first leaf of a plant that has just broken through the soil, but it was real, and Sonia received it as though it were the most precious thing anyone had given her in a very long time. They stayed there until the rain eased, and the light of dusk filtered through the room's window, tinting the walls a soft orange that made everything seem warmer, more possible, closer to the life they both wanted, and that now, for the first time, felt within reach. That night, Miriam didn't go back to her downtown apartment. She stayed in Catherine's house. Sonia stayed with her. Nothing happened that needed to be described or justified. They simply stayed together, in the living room with its high ceilings and thick walls, drinking coffee from a tin Miriam found in the kitchen that was miraculously still good, talking until their voices wore thin, and the silence that remained between them was no longer the kind that needs to be filled. Sonia fell asleep first, curled up on the green velvet armchair with her head resting on a cushion that probably hadn't been washed in a decade. Miriam watched her sleep with an attention that was new to her. The way she breathed, the way her eyelids moved, the small furrow between her brows that didn't disappear even in sleep, as if even in dreams she were concentrating on something important. Miriam leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. She listened to the sounds of the house, the creaking of old wood, the drip of rain in the courtyard, the distant murmur of a city that stayed alive on the other side of the walls. And for the first time in a very long time, the loneliness that had always accompanied her like a shadow wasn't there. In its place was something new, something that pulsed beneath her skin like a second heart that nobody else could hear. The days that followed the kiss were a kind of uncharted territory. Miriam and Sonia moved through it with the clumsiness of two people who have just discovered a new language and still haven't mastered the grammar. They saw each other every day at the studio. They were still working on the last sections of the letter, but now the silences carried a different weight, sweeter, more dangerous. Glances lasted a beat longer. Accidental touches while passing instruments left a trail of heat that was slow to fade. Neither of them knew exactly what they were building, where Ruth and Catherine's story ended and theirs began. And that, far from being a problem, was the most thrilling thing Miriam had ever felt in her life. But real life has a way of interrupting perfect moments, and the interruption came on a Monday in April, in the form of a phone call. Miriam was in the studio, reading the last restored lines of the letter, while Sonia prepared the reagents for the final session, when her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen. It was her mother. They hadn't spoken since Catherine's funeral. Miriam had tried calling her twice during those weeks to tell her about the box, the letter, the story of Catherine and Ruth. Both times it went to voicemail. The third time she didn't try. She answered, "Miriam?" Her mother's voice sounded different. Not clipped as usual, but strained, like a rope about to snap. "I need to talk to you. It's about Catherine's house." "What about it?" Your Uncle Robert called me. He says that house is worth a lot of money. That it's in a historic zone and a real estate developer is making a significant offer for the lot. He wants you to sell. The house is mine. Catherine left it to me. She left it to you because she had no one else. But that house is a family asset, Miriam. You can't just keep it and do whatever you want. Of course I can. That's exactly what inheriting something means. A sharp silence. Miriam could picture her mother in the living room of her house in Atlanta, sitting on the leather sofa, jaw tight, wearing that expression she used when things weren't going her way. Miriam, don't be stubborn. It's an old house. It's falling apart. What do you want it for? For something I can't explain over the phone. What for? Mom, why did you never talk to me about Catherine? I don't mean the house. I mean her. Her life. Why she lived alone. Another silence. Longer. Miriam heard her mother breathing on the other end, a rough, controlled sound, like someone measuring each word before releasing it. There's nothing to tell. She was a lonely woman. She chose to live that way. She didn't choose. The choice was taken from her. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Grandma Louise knew. You know? The whole family knew and chose to stay quiet. Just like Catherine stayed quiet. Just like Ruth stayed quiet. The name fell like a stone into still water. Miriam heard the impact in her mother's silence. A silence that was no longer about control, but about surprise, about fear, about something ancient surfacing after decades of submersion. Where did you hear that name? Her mother's voice was a thread. In the box Catherine kept in the back room for 50 years. In the letter Ruth wrote her and could never deliver. In the photographs of the two of them together. In a diary that describes how they fell in love and how they were torn apart because in 1976, two women couldn't love each other without the world destroying them. Miriam spoke with a calm she didn't feel. Sonia, across the studio, had stopped preparing reagents and was watching her with that silent attention that was her way of saying, "I'm here." Miriam. Her mother's voice cracked. Not much, barely a fissure, but enough for Miriam to understand that behind the hardness was something more. Your grandmother Louise knew. She told me once when I was young. She said Catherine had a special friend. That the family decided it was best they didn't see each other anymore. That they sent the other woman away. That Catherine never recovered. But that at least she lived a decent life. Decent. Miriam gripped the phone. She lived alone. She ate alone. She died alone. That's decent? Things were different back then, Miriam. You can't judge with today's eyes. I'm not judging. I'm hurting. There's a difference. Her mother didn't respond for several seconds. When she spoke, her voice held a tone Miriam had never heard from her. Vulnerable, almost fragile, as if the conversation had carried her to a place where her usual defenses didn't work. What do you want the house for, Miriam? Miriam looked at Sonia. Sonia looked at her. And in that exchange of glances, in that second that held everything unsaid and everything yet to come, Miriam made a decision that had been forming inside her since the day she opened the metal box. To give dignity back to a story this family silenced for half a century. I'm not selling the house, Mom. Not now, not later. And there's something else you need to know, but I'll tell you that in person. She hung up. She stood in the middle of the studio with the phone in her hand and adrenaline coursing through her body like an electric current. Sonia approached slowly, without touching her, giving her space. Are you okay? Sonia asked. No, but I will be. Sonia nodded. What are you going to tell her in person? Miriam looked at her. She felt the weight of the question, and the weight of the answer, and the weight of everything that answer implied. Stepping out of the silence, breaking the pattern, doing what Catherine couldn't, and what Ruth had regretted not doing. The truth, Miriam said. The whole truth. Sonia reached out and touched her arm. Just that, a light, brief contact that carried a promise that didn't need words. You don't have to do it alone, Sonia said. I know. That afternoon they didn't work on the letter. They sat in the small back garden of the studio, a rectangle of earth where Sonia kept 3 pots of herbs, rosemary, basil, thyme, and talked about what lay ahead. Miriam told her about her Uncle Robert, a businessman who saw an opportunity for profit in everything and who probably wasn't going to drop the subject of the sale easily. She told her about her mother, a woman who wasn't bad but scared, who had built her entire life on the idea that certain things go unnamed and that naming them was dangerous. And you? Sonia asked, plucking a basil leaf and rubbing it between her fingers, filling the air with a green, fresh scent. When did you know? About yourself, I mean. Miriam was quiet for a moment. The afternoon sun came into the garden at an angle that hit her face directly, and she closed her eyes to feel the warmth. I think I always knew. But knowing is a strange word. You can know something and at the same time convince yourself you don't. You can feel something with your whole body and still tell yourself it's not real. It's confusion. It's a phase. I had 2 boyfriends. With both of them, I felt like an actress in a play I didn't choose. I said the right lines, made the right gestures, but inside there was an emptiness that nothing I was supposed to fill it with ever filled. And now? Miriam opened her eyes. She looked at Sonia, who watched her with the basil leaf still between her fingers and an expression that was half curiosity, half hope, half fear. Now the emptiness isn't there. They didn't kiss in that moment. There was no need. There was something more powerful in the naked honesty of those words, in the way Miriam released them without ornament or protection, like someone removing a piece of armor they'd worn so long they'd forgotten it wasn't skin. But the peace didn't last. 3 days later, Uncle Robert showed up in person. He arrived on a Friday morning at Catherine's house, where Miriam had been spending afternoons sorting through her great-aunt's belongings, opening windows that had been sealed for decades, letting the Savannah air in to sweep away the smell of confinement. He was a tall man with a prominent belly, a gold watch squeezing his wrist, and a salesman's smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was accompanied by a younger man in a suit who introduced himself as Mr. Prescott, representing Magnolia Bay Development Group. Niece, Robert said, hugging her with the false warmth Miriam remembered from family gatherings as a child. Came to see the house, and to tell you about an opportunity you can't pass up. I don't want to sell, Uncle Robert. Hear me out first. Mr. Prescott has a very attractive proposal. They're developing a luxury condo project in this area and they need this lot. The offer is generous. With that money, you could buy a new apartment, invest, secure your future. Mr. Prescott opened a briefcase and produced papers with figures and floor plans that Miriam didn't look at. I don't want to sell the house, Miriam repeated, with the same calm she used when a researcher insisted on removing a document from the archives without authorization. My decision is made. Robert changed tactics. His smile hardened. Miriam, don't be sentimental. It's an old house. It's falling to pieces. What are you going to do with it? Live here alone like Catherine did? End up like her? The words hit. Miriam felt them in her stomach, like an unexpected punch. End up like her. Alone, odd, forgotten. That was what her uncle was saying without saying it. And Miriam recognized in those words the same poison that had silenced Catherine for half a century. The implicit threat that being different has a price, and that the price is loneliness. "Uncle," Miriam said, and her voice didn't waver. "Catherine didn't end up alone because she wanted to. She ended up alone because people like you and Grandma and Mom decided that what she felt was wrong and let her rot in this house without anyone so much as asking if she needed something. She didn't end up alone. She was left alone. And I'm not going to let you do the same thing to her memory." Robert looked at her as if he didn't recognize her. Mr. Prescott closed his briefcase with a discreet click. "You're talking nonsense," Robert said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I don't know what's gotten into your head, but nothing got into my head. I found it myself, in this house, in the box Catherine kept for 50 years because she had no one to tell." "What box? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a love letter, about a woman named Ruth, about two women who loved each other in an era that wouldn't allow it, and a family that chose to tear them apart because silence was more comfortable than the truth." Robert went quiet. His face cycled through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, discomfort, something that might have been shame, before landing on the one he knew best: indignation. "Look, Miriam, whatever happened between Catherine and whoever doesn't change the fact that this property is worth money and keeping it in this condition is a waste. I'm your family and I'm looking out for your best interest. If you were looking out for my best interest, you wouldn't be trying to sell the only thing Catherine left me in this world. Leave, Uncle, and take Mr. Prescott with you." Robert left the house muttering something Miriam couldn't hear and probably didn't want to. Mr. Prescott glanced at her with a mixture of discomfort and respect before following. The wooden door closed behind them with a thud that echoed through the courtyard like the final period of a conversation that should have happened a long time ago. Miriam stood in the courtyard, with her heart hammering and her hands shaking, not from fear, but from something that felt like freedom. She had said what she wanted to say. Not everything. She hadn't yet told her family about Sonia, about herself, about what was being born between them. But she had taken the first step, had cracked open the first breach in the wall of silence, and that was more than Catherine had managed in an entire lifetime. Her phone rang. It was Sonia. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Do you need me to come?" "I'm fine. Come if you want." "On my way." Sonia arrived 20 minutes later with 2 coffees from the Coffee Fox and 2 biscuits from Back in the Day Bakery. They sat in the courtyard beneath the wisteria, and Miriam recounted her uncle's visit while they ate biscuits and drank coffee that tasted of chicory and comfort. "So, what are you going to do at the house?" Sonia asked, brushing crumbs from her lips. "I have an idea, but first we need to finish the letter." Sonia smiled, and that smile, there, beneath the wisteria Catherine had tended for decades, with hot coffee between their hands and the sounds of Savannah drifting in through the open windows, struck Miriam as the closest thing to happiness she had ever known. Sharing this story can be a hug for someone who needs it. The following week was the last of restoration. Sonia worked on the final sections of the letter with a dedication that bordered on obsession, staying hours past closing in the studio after Miriam left, refining every letter, making sure not a single word was lost. On Friday, when Miriam arrived at the studio at 10 in the morning, Sonia was waiting with the fully restored paper laid out on the table, protected between 2 sheets of glass. "It's done," Sonia said. "Every word." Miriam sat before the document and read it in full for the first time. From the opening line, "If anyone ever reads this, I want them to know that what I felt was real," to the final one, which Sonia had restored the night before, and which Miriam had not yet seen. The last line read, "Catherine, if life were fair, we would have found each other in a different time. But if life were fair, perhaps we wouldn't have known what it means to love with everything against you. I love you. I loved you. I will love you until the words run out. And after that, too. Yours. Even if the world doesn't know it. Always yours. Ruth. Miriam raised her eyes from the paper. They were wet. Sonia watched her from across the table with an expression that held grief and relief at the same time, like someone completing a journey that was painful but necessary. Your grandmother could write, Miriam said, her voice unsteady. My grandmother loved too much, Sonia replied. And nobody taught her that loving wasn't a crime. They looked at each other over the glass that protected the words of a woman who had loved in silence her whole life. And in that look, they made a promise they didn't need to say aloud, that they would not repeat that silence. 3 months later, Catherine's house was unrecognizable. Not because its structure had changed. The brick walls still stood, the high ceilings, the courtyard with its wisteria that now, fed and pruned with care, had doubled in size and covered nearly the entire south wall like a cascade of purple. What had changed was the life it held. Miriam had given up her downtown apartment. The decision wasn't hard. The apartment had always been a functional space, a place to sleep and store things, not a home. Catherine's house, on the other hand, had something no modern apartment could offer: a history, roots, an emotional weight that Miriam felt every time she crossed the threshold, as though the house recognized her and whispered, "At last." Sonia helped with the move, which was modest. Boxes of books, personal files, clothes, the pothos plant that traveled from downtown to the historic district in the backseat of a cab, and now shared the courtyard with the wisteria, as if they'd always been together. Then, together, they transformed the house. They opened every window that had been sealed for years. They painted the living room walls a warm white that made the afternoon light bounce and fill every corner. They restored the tile floors, repaired the roof leaks, replaced the kitchen pipes that groaned every time the faucet ran. The back room, the room where the box had been, where the secret was kept, where they'd shared their first kiss in the rain, became something Miriam had thought of one night, and Sonia refined over weeks. A small paper conservation workshop, equipped with Sonia's instruments and shelves for rescued documents. The idea was simple: offer free conservation of old personal documents to families in Savannah who had letters, diaries, photographs, or other papers at risk of being lost. Give voice back to the stories that time was erasing. Sonia closed her studio in the alley and moved into Catherine's house. There was no formal conversation about it, no dramatic moment of definition. Simply, the nights Sonia stayed began to outnumber the ones she didn't, and one day her conservation brushes and reagent jars were in the back room, and her clothes were in the bedroom wardrobe, and her favorite mug, a blue and white ceramic one with a chip in the handle, was in the kitchen next to Miriam's. And so, without ceremony or declaration, the house of a woman who lived alone became the house of two women who chose not to. Mornings had a routine that struck Miriam as miraculous in its simplicity. She'd wake to the sound of Sonia making coffee in the kitchen, always chicory coffee in the ceramic carafe they'd bought together at City Market. They'd eat breakfast in the courtyard under the wisteria, with biscuits from back in the day, or grits and eggs that Sonia made with a dash of hot sauce her mother had taught her, which made Miriam's eyes water while she swore they were delicious. Then each went to work. Miriam to the Georgia Historical Society, Sonia to the workshop in the back room. They found each other in the afternoons. Sometimes they worked together on a document a neighborhood family had brought. Sometimes they walked through Savannah with no destination, discovering corners neither of them knew despite having lived there for months. A bookshop hidden in a basement on Bull Street, a secret garden behind the Telfair Museum, a barbecue joint in an alley where an 80-year-old pitmaster made the best pulled pork in the county and told them stories of 1960s Savannah while serving them coleslaw and cornbread that crumbled in their hands. Sometimes they did nothing at all. They sat in the courtyard with a book each, in silence, barefoot on the warm tiles, letting time pass without asking anything of it. Miriam discovered that shared silence was radically different from solitary silence. One was empty, the other was full. One weighed you down, the other held you up. But not everything was easy. Real life never is, and Miriam knew it. The conversation with her mother took place on a Sunday in July when Miriam drove to Atlanta to see her. She went alone. Sonia offered to come along, but Miriam felt it was something she needed to do on her own, at least the first time. Her mother lived in a small, tidy house in a quiet neighborhood with a front garden where roses grew, tended with the same meticulousness she applied to her image. Everything in its place, nothing out of control. Every petal where it should be. Miriam found her in the kitchen, making sweet tea, wearing an apron that said, "World's Best Mom," and that someone had probably given her years ago, and that she wore out of habit, not conviction. They sat at the kitchen table with glasses of sweet tea and a plate of pecan cookies that neither of them touched. "Mom," Miriam began, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I need to tell you something." Her mother looked at her with the cautious expression she used when she sensed a conversation was heading somewhere she didn't want to go. "Is it about the house?" "It's about me." The silence that followed was dense, charged with anticipation. Miriam thought of Ruth writing in her diary, "I think Catherine knows. I think she knows and she doesn't mind. Or I think she knows and feels the same. I can't be sure. If I'm wrong, I lose her." But she was not Ruth. And this wasn't 1974. "I'm with someone," Miriam said. "Her name is Sonia. She's the conservator who helped me with Catherine's letter. We're living together in the house in Savannah." Her mother didn't move. She held the glass of sweet tea with both hands as if she needed something to hold on to. Her face passed through a series of expressions that Miriam observed with the archivist's attention that registers every detail. Surprise, denial, a flash of pain, then something more complex. Something Miriam couldn't fully categorize, but that looked like an internal battle between what her mother wanted to feel and what she actually felt. "Since when?" she asked, her voice controlled. "A few months. But what I feel for her didn't start at any particular moment. It grew, as if it had always been there, and I needed to find Catherine's letter to understand it." "Catherine's letter?" her mother repeated, and something softened in her voice, barely a degree, like ice beginning to yield under the sun. "That letter changed you. That letter showed me what happens when someone chooses silence. I don't want that for myself, Mom. I don't want to live with a padlock on the most important room of my life." Her mother set the glass on the table. She stared at the surface of the sweet tea, as if searching for something at the bottom. When she spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Are you happy?" It wasn't the question Miriam expected. She'd expected reproach, scripture, arguments about what the family would think, what the neighbors would say. She'd expected the same reaction Ruth's family had in 1976. Fear dressed as morality, rejection dressed as protection. But her mother did none of that. She asked if she was happy. And that question, coming from a woman who had built her entire life on control and appearances, was an act of courage that Miriam couldn't measure in that moment, but would understand later, with time, as the greatest gift her mother could give her. "Yes," Miriam answered. "I'm happy." Her mother nodded. She didn't smile, didn't hug her, didn't say, "I'm glad." She nodded, the way someone accepts a truth that needs time to settle. The way someone opens a door just 1 inch but opens it, and that's already something. That's already more than Catherine ever had. "I need time," her mother said. "That's okay. We have time. Miriam drove back to Savannah that night with a strange feeling. It wasn't quite relief, or triumph, or peace. It was something in between. Something that resembled the careful hope of someone who plants a seed, knowing it won't bloom tomorrow, but trusting that water and sun will do their work if given enough time. Sonia was waiting in the courtyard with coffee and news. A woman came to the workshop today, she said, as Miriam sat beside her on the stone bench they'd placed under the wisteria. Her name is Pearl. Miss Pearl. Miss Pearl? The name rang a bell. The same Miss Pearl mentioned in the letter? The one who took the photo at the Christmas gathering. She's 92 years old, lives 2 blocks from here, in the same house she's lived in her whole life. She heard we're restoring documents and came to bring some old letters her husband had written. But when I told her my name, she went white. She asked if I was any relation to Ruth Langston. Miriam felt a chill. And what did you tell her? The truth. I told her I was her granddaughter. She started to cry. She sat on the bench in the workshop and told me things my grandmother never put in the diary. She told me she was the only person who knew about Catherine and Ruth, that they confided in her because she was the closest neighbor and because she never judged anyone. She told me that the night of the Christmas Eve gathering, when she took the photo of them dancing, was the last time she saw them together. 2 weeks later, Ruth's family took her away to Nashville. Did she say anything else? Sonia pulled out her phone and found a photograph she'd taken that afternoon. She showed me this. She'd kept it in an album in her living room. On the phone screen, Miriam saw a color photograph, faded by the years but clear. It showed the courtyard of a house. This house, Catherine's house, in the middle of a party. Paper garlands hung from the walls. A wreath of holly hung on the door. And in the center, surrounded by people dancing and laughing, 2 women were looking at each other. They weren't dancing. They weren't talking. They were just looking. And in that look, frozen by a cheap camera from the 70s, was everything. The joy, the fear, the certainty, the love that couldn't be spoken but that spilled from their eyes like water from a glass too full. Miss Pearl wants to meet you, Sonia said. She says she has more to tell us, and she wants to see the restored letter. Miriam looked at the photo on the phone, then at Sonia, then at the wisteria cascading over them like a blessing in purple, and felt that the pieces of a puzzle that began 50 years ago were finally finding their place. Miss Pearl came the next day. She was a small woman, bent by age but with bright, lively eyes that moved across Catherine's courtyard with the agility of someone surveying familiar territory, an internal map that time hadn't erased. She walked slowly, leaning on a wooden cane, and stopped in front of the wisteria. Catherine planted this in 1972, she said, in a voice that trembled but was clear. Ruth gave her the cutting, said wisteria survives everything, the heat, the drought, the forgetting, that they were like them. They sat in the courtyard. Miriam served her coffee. Sonia showed her the restored letter, protected between its glass plates. Miss Pearl read it slowly, her eyes passing over each line with a reverence that was almost religious. When she finished, she removed her glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief, and looked at the 2 women watching her from across the table. Ruth always said this letter would find its way someday, Miss Pearl murmured. I didn't believe her. I thought it was just nostalgia talking. But she was right. Then she told them what she knew. She spoke of the afternoons when Catherine and Ruth met in this house, under the wisteria, with the excuse that Ruth came to help with the garden. Of how Miss Pearl would watch them from her window and understand without anyone telling her, because love, she said, is recognized, not explained. Of the night, Ruth came to say goodbye, and Catherine wasn't home. She'd gone to the market, a 20-minute errand that cost her the farewell of her life. And Ruth left the letter and the handkerchief in the box, and walked out crying down the street. And Miss Pearl saw her from her window and wanted to run after her, but didn't, because she didn't know what to say. I regretted it my whole life, Miss Pearl said, her voice breaking. Maybe if I'd said something, if I'd stopped her for just a minute, things would have been different. Maybe not, but at least I would have tried. Miriam took her hand. It was a tiny hand, full of wrinkles that looked like maps of all the years lived. Fragile as the paper Sonia conserved, but alive, warm, real. It wasn't your fault, Miss Pearl. It was fear's fault. Theirs, the family's, the era's. But it's over now. The letter arrived. Miss Pearl looked at Miriam, then at Sonia, then at their joined hands on the table. Because at some point, without noticing, Miriam and Sonia had taken each other's hand, and a slow, luminous smile lit up her face, as though someone had turned on a light inside her. "Are you two together?" she asked, with the frankness that comes with age and the certainty that life is too short for roundabouts. "Yes," Sonia answered, and her voice didn't waver. "We're together." Miss Pearl nodded. She pressed her free hand to her chest, as if trying to contain something expanding inside her. "Then it was all worth it," she said. "All the silence, all the pain, all the waiting. It was worth it because it brought you two here." The three of them stayed in the courtyard, drinking coffee under the wisteria that Ruth had given and Catherine had tended, and that now covered the wall like a living testament that some things survive everything: the heat, the drought, the forgetting, the fear, the passage of time that fades the ink, but doesn't fade what the ink was trying to say. Before she left, Miss Pearl told them one last thing. "Catherine used to visit me every Christmas. She'd sit in my parlor, drink eggnog, and before she left, she'd always look toward the street, toward the south, and go quiet for a while. I knew what she was thinking about, who she was thinking about. I never said anything, but once, the last Christmas before she got sick, I told her, 'Catherine, the love you don't forget is the only love worth having.' And she looked at me and said, 'Pearl, I haven't forgotten, not a single day.'" Miss Pearl left, walking slowly down the cobblestone street, her wooden cane tapping against the stones, and Miriam and Sonia watched her from the doorway of the house that was now theirs, both of theirs and everyone who had come before. The weeks that followed were about building. Miriam registered the conservation workshop as a nonprofit. They called it Wisteria Workshop, Rescuing Written Memories. Sonia designed the space, organized the materials, and began receiving documents from neighborhood families, letters from grandparents, old deeds, damaged photographs, diaries that moisture was devouring. Each document was a rescue, a voice saved from oblivion, and every time Sonia returned a restored paper to a family and saw the emotion in their eyes, Miriam felt Catherine's box open a little wider, the silence retreat one more step, something being repaired. The Georgia Historical Society offered Miriam a promotion that meant transferring to a different department. She turned it down. She preferred to stay in cataloging, where she could keep doing what she loved, bringing order to chaos, giving name and place to what others left uncategorized, and have her afternoons free for the workshop. Her mother came to visit them in September. She came alone without notice on a Saturday morning. She knocked on the door with the knock of someone who isn't sure they want to be where they are but who came anyway, because something stronger than discomfort pushed them. Sonia opened. They looked at each other for a second that held all the tension of the unspoken. Then Miriam's mother extended her hand. "I'm Eleanor," she said. "Miriam's mom." "Sonia," she replied, shaking her hand. "Please, come in. We were just having breakfast." The three of them ate breakfast in the courtyard. Biscuits and gravy, chicory coffee, peach preserves. Eleanor ate mostly in silence, looking around with eyes that were trying to process everything. The restored house, the lush wisteria, Sonia's instruments visible through the workshop window, and above all, the way her daughter and Sonia moved together through the kitchen with the natural coordination of a couple that already knows the other's rhythm. Miriam pouring the coffee exactly the way Sonia liked it. Sonia passing the plate of biscuits without Miriam having to ask. After breakfast, Miriam showed her the restored letter. Eleanor read it sitting in the green velvet armchair they'd cleaned and repaired, which was now the best reading spot in the house because the morning light fell directly on it like a soft spotlight. Miriam and Sonia left her alone with the letter. When they came back to the courtyard 20 minutes later, Eleanor's eyes were red. "I didn't know all this," she said, her voice rough. "I knew about Catherine, but I didn't know about the letter, or the diary, or the photo. I didn't know she suffered so much." "Nobody wanted to know," Miriam replied, without accusation, only with the sad acknowledgement of a fact. It was easier not to. Eleanor nodded. Then she looked at Sonia, who stood by the workshop door with her hands in the pockets of her work apron. "You restored this?" Eleanor asked, gesturing toward the letter. "Yes." "Thank you," Eleanor said, and that word, spoken with a simplicity that made it more powerful than any speech, was the first stone of a bridge that would take time to build, but that at least now had a foundation, a starting point, a direction. Eleanor left that afternoon. Before she went, at the door, she hugged Miriam. It was a short, stiff hug. Eleanor wasn't a woman for long embraces, but it was real. Then, in a gesture Miriam didn't expect, she turned to Sonia and hugged her too. Even briefer, almost a graze, but enough. "Take care of each other," Eleanor said, and she walked down the cobblestone lane toward the cab waiting at the corner. Miriam closed the door. Sonia was waiting in the courtyard. The wisteria was dropping its blossoms over the stones as always, with that absurd generosity of things that don't need permission to be beautiful. "Are you okay?" Sonia asked. Miriam walked to her. She wrapped her arms around Sonia's waist and rested her forehead against her shoulder. She smelled of rosemary, of chemical reagents, of chicory coffee. She smelled of home. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm home." They stayed like that for a while, holding each other beneath the wisteria, while the September sun fell on Savannah with that golden light that only exists in the low country when the afternoon begins to surrender and everything looks softer, kinder, more willing to forgive. Ruth's letter was displayed in the workshop, protected in a glass frame, alongside the 3 photographs, the one at the park, the one on the bench, and the one of the dance at the Christmas gathering. Beneath them, a small plaque that Miriam had made, which read, "For Catherine and Ruth, for the love that was real, even if the world didn't know it." Every person who entered the workshop saw it. Some read it in full, in silence. Others asked about the story. Miriam and Sonia told it together, the way stories that matter are told, without embellishment, without shame, with the naked truth and the certainty that every time they told it, the silence lost a little more ground. Miss Pearl visited every week. She'd sit in the courtyard with her coffee and tell them stories of the neighborhood, the market, the people who were gone, but whom she kept alive in her memory, the way someone tends an internal garden that no one else can see. Sometimes she talked about Catherine and Ruth. Sometimes she talked about her own late husband, about the bakery they'd run together in the 60s, about the smell of fresh bread at 4 a.m. Sometimes she didn't talk at all. She just sat there, eyes closed, the sun on her face, smiling as if the simple fact of being alive and surrounded by people who cared about her was enough. One day, Miss Pearl told Miriam something Miriam would never forget. You know what the difference is between your story and theirs? The old woman asked, pointing at the framed letter on the wall. What? They had to write their love on a piece of paper and hide it in a box. You two are living it in broad daylight. That's all they ever wanted. That's all anyone ever wants. Miriam looked at Sonia, who was in the workshop restoring a letter from 1940 that a neighborhood gentleman had brought that morning. The light from the skylight fell on her hands as she worked with that absolute concentration that still fascinated Miriam, as if every document were a person who needed to be heard, and Sonia were the only one who spoke their language. As if sensing the gaze, Sonia looked up and met her eyes through the window, and smiled. That smile that was hers alone, that started in the eyes before reaching the lips, that contained the story of a grandmother who danced at a Christmas Eve gathering and had to leave, of a great aunt who locked a love in a box and never opened it again, of two women who found each other through a dying letter and decided that this time the story would end differently. And Miriam smiled back. And the wisteria went on spilling its blossoms over the courtyard stones as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And outside, Savannah went on being Savannah. Cobblestone lanes, antebellum facades, live oaks that in spring would drape the streets in gray-green moss, vendors selling pralines with voices from another century. The life of an old city that knew how to keep secrets, but also knew when the time came how to let them go. And in a house with a wisteria that had survived the forgetting, two women lived the life that two others never could. Not out of obligation, not out of debt, not to repeat or repair, but because they chose to, because they could, because the world, though slow, though clumsy, though still full of rooms locked with chains and boxes sealed with wire, also knew, sometimes, how to open its doors. If you want the continuation of this story, write it in the comments, because that's the only way I'll know you want it. And don't forget that YouTube prioritizes subscribers. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story that will make you believe in love and second chances. This is just the beginning. See you soon.